It is January 3, 2026, and in a cold holding cell in Brooklyn, a man who once held the keys to the world's largest oil reserves sits in silence. Nicolas Maduro, the former president of Venezuela, is no longer surrounded by the gold-leafed mirrors of the Miraflores Palace. Instead, he faces a federal judge and a lifetime of consequences. But before the history books dry the ink on this chapter, we have to understand that this wasn't just a sudden Delta Force extraction or a high-stakes political play. The handcuffs seen in the viral news footage were forged over a decade ago by an economic catastrophe so complete and so mathematically impossible that it turned the wealthiest nation in South America into a forensic crime scene. Imagine for a moment that you were sitting on a literal swimming pool of gold, possessing more proven oil than Saudi Arabia, more fertile land than your neighbors, and a highly educated population. And then you starve. This is not just a story of a country going broke, it is the story of how a government deleted 80% of its economy in a single decade. How do you lose $100 billion without building a single bridge? And how do you make a cup of coffee cost 3 million bolivars? This is the autopsy of the most spectacular financial suicide in modern history, the economy that finally nailed Maduro. To understand why the president of an oil superpower ended up in a Brooklyn jail, we have to look at the moment the black gold trap was set. Beneath the Venezuelan soil lie 300 billion barrels of proven oil reserves, the largest stash on planet Earth. It was a geological lottery ticket that should have made every citizen a millionaire. But in the world of economics, oil is a jealous god. When Maduro took the wheel in 2013, following the death of Hugo Chavez, he inherited a vehicle that was already smoking under the hood. For years, the nation had been infected with a severe case of Dutch disease. When you make so much money selling oil, your currency becomes super strong, making it incredibly cheap to import everything from abroad. Why would you grow tomatoes in the Venezuelan countryside when you can buy them from Brazil for pennies? And why would you manufacture cars when you can import Toyotas with easy oil money? Venezuela stopped producing, stopped farming, and stopped making anything. They simply pumped oil, sold it, and imported 96% of what they needed, from medicine to toilet paper. As long as oil stayed at $100 a barrel, the party was loud, drunken, and seemingly endless. But Maduro didn't just inherit an addiction to oil, he inherited a broken pump. Years earlier, in a moment of ego that would eventually doom the nation, the government fired nearly 20,000 engineers and geologists from PDVSA, the state oil company, because they dared to go on strike. These experts were replaced by political loyalists, people who knew everything about chanting revolutionary slogans, but absolutely nothing about maintaining high-pressure subterranean pipes or reservoir pressure. By the time Maduro sat in the big chair, the infrastructure was rotting, the pumps were rusting, and the pipelines were leaking. Yet he needed the cash to keep his generals loyal and his political rallies funded. Instead of fixing the rigs, he treated PDVSA like a personal ATM, deleting the maintenance budget to pay for social control. The result was the first nail in the coffin, a total production collapse. Production plummeted from 3 million barrels a day to a pathetic 337,000 in 2020. It was like owning the world's largest bakery, firing the bakers, selling the ovens for scrap metal, and then acting surprised when there was no bread to sell. When the price of oil finally crashed in 2014, the ATM ran dry, but the government still had billions in bills to pay. Any sane economist would have cut spending or raised taxes, but Maduro chose a path that would lead to total ruin. He told the central bank to just print more money. This wasn't just inflation, it was hyperinflation that broke the speedometer of the economy. In 2013, inflation was a worrying 56%, but by 2018, it hit a mind-bending 130,000%. Some estimates for 2019 even put it at over 300%. Prices weren't changing by the year or the month, they were changing by the hour. Waiters in Caracas restaurants stopped giving out menus with prices, because by the time you finished your appetizer, the price of the steak had already doubled. The local currency, the Bolivar, became literally worthless. It became cheaper to use banknotes as napkins or wallpaper than to actually buy those items.
People began weaving purses out of cash because the craft value of the paper was higher than the face value of the money itself. Maduro's response was to declare an economic war and blame the CIA, shopkeepers, and capitalist parasites. But by destroying the currency, he had set the nation's trust on fire. As the money died, the hunger began. And this is where the story shifts from a financial tragedy into a humanitarian horror show. By 2016, a dark joke began circulating on the streets of Caracas called the Maduro Diet. It gets you skinny, but it doesn't make you fit. University studies showed that 75% of the population lost an average of 19 pounds in a single year because they were forced to skip meals. The government weaponized this scarcity through clap boxes, subsidized food packages delivered directly to homes. On paper, it was relief. In reality, it was a leash. If you protested or didn't sign the party list, your box simply never arrived. While children fainted in schools from malnutrition, the regime's inner circle, including fixers like Alex Saab, allegedly grew rich by importing low-quality food at massive markups, pocketing the difference while the state bled out. They turned starvation into a business model, breaking the spirit of the working class, who were now too busy surviving to ever think of revolting. When a house is on fire, you don't debate the architecture, you jump out the window. Since 2014, roughly 7.7 million Venezuelans, 25% of the entire population, have fled the country, creating the largest displacement crisis in the Western Hemisphere. Imagine if every single person in Texas just packed up and walked away. This wasn't just a loss of people, it was a brain drain of the doctors, engineers, and technicians needed to keep the country running. Picture a hospital in Caracas in 2019. The power goes out, the backup generator is broken because the parts were stolen, and the surgeon isn't there because he's in Miami or Madrid washing dishes just to earn more than his $6 a month salary back home. Venezuela didn't just lose money, it lost the collective intelligence of its nation. Hundreds of thousands risked death walking through the Darien Gap, one of the most dangerous jungles on Earth, just for a chance at a future that didn't involve digging through trash for food. The physical collapse reached its peak in March 2019, when the entire country went dark for 5 days. The Guri Dam, which supplies 80% of the nation's power, failed due to criminal negligence. Maduro claimed it was a cyber attack from Washington, but the few engineers left knew the truth. The system had simply rotted away from lack of maintenance. Without power, the water pumps stopped. In a tropical country with 90-degree heat, people were seen scooping water from the polluted Guaire River, liquid sewage, just to flush toilets. In the hospitals, neonatal incubators shut off, and dialysis machines stopped, leading to a death toll that will likely never be fully known. This was the moment the economy stopped being about numbers and became a direct physical threat to human life.
To survive, the regime made a deal with the devil by quietly legalizing the US dollar, the very currency Maduro had spent years vilifying. This created a dystopian two-tier society, the 95% earning worthless bolivares and the 5% elite who had dollars and could shop at luxury bodegones filled with imported Nutella and PlayStation 5s. While Caracas developed a bubble of hyper-capitalist luxury that gave the illusion of recovery, the reality was built on blood gold. When the oil dried up, Maduro opened the Arco Minero, a zone larger than Portugal where the military and criminal syndicates used toxic mercury to extract gold, poisoning indigenous tribes and rivers in the process. This gold was flown out on private planes to places like Turkey or the UAE and swapped for bags of cash used to keep the military loyal. Venezuela was no longer a state, it had become a criminal enterprise pretending to be a country. The final mistake occurred in 2024. Suffocating under sanctions, Maduro signed the Barbados Agreement, promising a free election in exchange for the world letting him sell oil again. On July 28, 2024, the people spoke, and opposition candidate Edmundo Gonzalez won in a massive landslide. Maduro had a choice: accept defeat and retire to a beach in Turkey, or steal the vote and doom the economy to eternal isolation. He chose the latter, triggering the snapback of US sanctions and the final flight of foreign investors. But more importantly, he became toxic to his own military. With a $15 million bounty on his head from the US Department of Justice, his bodyguards began to realize he was worth more as a lottery ticket than as a leader. When the economy is bankrupt, loyalty has a very specific price tag, and $15 million is a number that hungry soldiers find hard to ignore. The end of the line finally came on January 3, 2026, when the economic math hit zero. The cash payments to the top brass arrived late, the gold mines were squeezed, and the incentive structures flipped. When the Delta Force teams landed, they didn't face a fanatical defense, they faced a regime that had already hollowed itself out from within. The economy hadn't just weakened Maduro, it had stripped him of his shield. Now, as he sits in that Brooklyn cell, the verdict is final. You can survive being hated, and you can survive sanctions, but you cannot survive committing economic suicide. Maduro is gone, but the road to rebuilding a nation that saw its GDP contract by 80% and its population scattered across the globe will be the hardest work of all. Venezuela is finally free of the man, but it must now begin the long process of freeing itself from the wreckage he left behind.